Make sure y'all stay on point with
The Puncher's Point. What is good, y'all? Welcome to the Puncher's Point. Unfortunately, I have to announce some bad news, and I wish I was talking about a more positive topic, but two-time heavyweight champion George Foreman passed away at the age of 76. He passed away today. Definitely a sad, sad loss to the sport of boxing. I mean, first of all, let's just say this right now. Before I start off with anything, may George Foreman rest in peace. Condolences to the family and his loved ones. Sad loss, really, really sad loss. I mean, before we go into the career of George Foreman, because this is going to be a decent sized video, this is shocking, honestly, because even though he's 76 years old, he didn't seem like he was in bad health. And, I seen like a little bit of videos of him on the internet. He always was in good spirits. What I loved about George Foreman, me personally, was he was committed to his faith. He was the true definition of a warrior in that ring. And then last but not least, the guy was super humble. A lot of people don't give him credit on how humble he really was. So with that being said, let's get into this video. I want to make this video a tribute episode to George Foreman instead of just, being depressed and sad. I want to make this a tribute episode to George Foreman. George Foreman, I mean, what can you say about him as far as like a boxer? I mean, his resume was stacked. He fought the absolute best, whether that was the first stint of his career and or the second stint of his career. And unlike a lot of boxers, George Foreman, if you were to look at technically he has two careers in one. There was the early career before he retired, and then there was post-retirement when he came back and he made his comeback win against Michael Moore, which is one of the most, if not the most legendary comeback in sports. Who do you know who was champion at 25, lost the belt? Who do you know that comes back at the age of 45, 20 years later and recaptures that belt? There's boxers who retire at the age of 40. There's boxers right now who are approaching 45, and you can tell that their prime is past them. George Foreman, honestly, at the age of 45, him capturing that title, that's got to be one of the greatest moments in sports history. That's got to be one of the greatest comebacks in sports history because nobody's doing that. Not many people on the face of this earth can do what he did, going in there and beating a monster like Michael Moore. But overall, besides that, if we're going to talk about what he's done in the sport of boxing, I mean, look no further. I mean, the guy has done almost anything that there is to do. We can talk about his Olympic win in the 1968 Olympics. We could talk about how he was able to capture that medal in the 1968 Olympics, that gold medal, by the way, just to remind y'all. And then on top of that, his professional career was just absolutely insane. And what I want to first talk about is his fight with Joe Frazier. This man bullied Joe Frazier in a way I have never seen a man get bullied before in my life. There's no doubt about it. This guy, I mean, he just put fear into everybody's hearts. And obviously, with George Foreman, he was that guy who was based on fear, his hard punching ability. He didn't need to, unload everything into his punches. He was just a hard hitter in general. And so I believe that's what separated George Foreman from a lot of people. Technique wise, he wasn't the most polished. He wasn't a Muhammad Ali. He wasn't a Joe Frazier. But let me tell you something. You got into the ring with George Foreman, you better have made sure that you were in for a fight because he was going to hurt you in ways that no boxer was ever going to hurt you. So then you fast forward to the Rumble in the Jungle, arguably the most famous fight of all time. You fast forward to that fight, and he was dominating Ali. Obviously, the whole rope a dope thing. Ali knocks him out, wins back the belt. That was a good comeback from Ali. George Foreman fought five more times after that. He decided to retire from the sport of boxing at 28 years old, which was 3 years after he lost that belt to Muhammad Ali, and he became a pastor. And he was a pretty successful pastor as well. We're talking about a guy who was he was a pastor. He was a great contribution to his community. He built a youth boxing gym to keep the youth out of trouble in those areas because those areas weren't the best areas. And then obviously from what the movie Big George Foreman stated was he had somebody that was handling his money and the money got lost and he never told him about it. So the bills were coming in and there was no way to pay him but to get back into the sport of boxing. Now here's what I respect the most about George Foreman. So When boxers retire, some guys stay in shape. Floyd Mayweather, he's stayed in shape. He's probably in fight shape right now. That's just the way Floyd Mayweather was. Big George Foreman had no intentions on coming back to the sport of boxing. I mean, he was 28 when he retired, and then when he came back 10 years later, he was 38 years old. Now, 38 years old is pushing the end of your career right there. So he had no intentions of coming back. As a matter of fact, if the bills weren't piling up and he didn't lose his money, he probably wouldn't have came back. But it was all part of God's plan because he came back 10 years later and they were giving him some easy opponents that he was just knocking out. But what I respect the most is before he came back, he had to get into shape. And look, George Foreman, like he wasn't an Adonis by no means. But the thing is about George Foreman, I give him a ton of respect because he wasn't in fight shape for those 10 years. What he had to put himself through, he had to get himself back into fight shape. He had to remember everything that he learned about boxing. He had to basically adapt. And as a human, that's what we got to do in life. It's not just boxing. We have to adapt. And he was perfect at that. He got himself into fight shape and he was knocking out some guys, like some hand-picked opponents that they were giving him. And then he had a fight with Evander Holyfield. And at that time, let's get one thing straight. Evander Holyfield was him. Let's be honest. I mean, it was Mike Tyson and Evander Holyfield. Those are the two heavyweights that you were talking about. And even though George Foreman lost that fight, he lost it by decision. He took Evander Holyfield's best, kept coming forward, and he gave Evander Holyfield a fight. So obviously that success definitely helped him with the money and everything like that, but it wasn't over yet. He could have just retired right then and there, be like, I had my fight with Evander Holyfield. People can call it a super fight. And then from there on, I could just retire, lay into the sunset. But he didn't. He realized that since he's gotten this far, why not fight Michael Moore? Why not go after that championship? And he got a shot at Michael Moore. And when he got that shot, he did not disappoint. I want to compare his worst loss to his greatest win. When he lost to Muhammad Ali rope-a-doped him. Muhammad Ali was smarter that night, and he rope-a-doped him, and he got George Foreman all tired out. Fast forward 20 years later, what did George Foreman learn when he got that shot again? George Foreman learned that he didn't have to put all of his power into those punches. He didn't have to waste his energy and lower his stamina, his endurance. He didn't have to do all that. All he had to do was make sure he puts just a certain percentage on those punches, maybe 20, 30, 40%. Michael Moore, thinks he's getting his best. Michael Moore gets a little bit too comfortable, starts coming in a lot more. As long as George Foreman can take those punches, he's got that win, and he did. Boy, did he ever. When George Foreman realized that Michael Moore was getting tired, George Foreman was like, now I'm gonna give 100% into my punches, and Michael Moore is gonna feel him. And boy, did he ever. He not only did he beat Michael Moore, he knocked Michael Moore out. And Michael Moore, if y'all don't realize how good Michael Moore was at that time, go back and look at the highlights of Michael Moore before he fought George Foreman. That guy was a monster. But you know who was a bigger monster? George Foreman. And what I love about that fight is he won the heavyweight championship 20 years later, and he did it in the same exact shorts that he lost against Ali in Rumble in the Jungle. Those same exact trunks, those same exact shorts were worn when he lost in the Rumble of the Jungle, and those same exact shorts were worn when he ended up defeating Michael Moore to become heavyweight champion again. Then obviously after that he had fights with guys like Tommy Morrison. He had fights against guys like Shannon Briggs, and overall, I mean, he had himself a good career. I will say that he had himself a very, very good career. The Tommy Morrison, I do want to correct myself. The Tommy Morrison fight was right before the Michael Moore fight, and he lost that fight to Tommy Morrison. But overall, I mean, when we're talking about George Foreman, the guy was 76-5. After that, obviously the George Foreman grills were taken off. He made a lot of money off of that, and honestly, he did well for himself. He's had an amazing family, amazing kids. I think one of his kids are boxing. I believe his daughter was a boxer too. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe his daughter was a boxer as well. And when I look at it, I just look at the career that he had, and I realize that he's done an amazing job. Honestly, he he's done an amazing job. His daughter was a boxer, and in the year 2000, she became professional, and obviously, she basically followed in her father's footsteps, like Layla Ali, like Joe Frazier's daughter. Um, but overall, I will say this: George Foreman. I think when we go back and we look at the life of George Foreman, I think we have to realize that he was a great boxer, Hall of Fame boxer, one of the greatest to ever do it, one of the greatest heavyweight champions of all time, without a doubt. But I think we also got to look at the way George Foreman carried himself. He learned from trials and tribulation. The guy did not grow up wealthy at all, by no means. He grew up very, very poor, was in the military, learned to fight, all that type of stuff. We know the story. If you go back and if you watch the movie Big George Foreman, you can understand all of George Foreman's life. But I think the one thing that we need to take away from George Foreman's life and his career and all that, when we put it all together, is he carried himself like a champion in and out of that ring. He had values, he had beliefs, and I don't care, like whatever your religion is, you got to believe in something. You got to have faith in something, and he chose his faith over a boxing career. And some people might call that crazy, but honestly, that takes a lot of guts to leave something that you're good at to go follow something that you're passionate about. And George Foreman did that. He did that for a good 10 years, came back, and he proved that, look, you can do anything in this world. And as long as you're committed, as long as you're determined, you can do it. And George Foreman, at the age of 45, became world heavyweight champion again after 20 years when he was 25, losing it to Muhammad Ali. You don't hear stories like that a lot often. I mean, his story is a Hollywood movie, and they turned it into a very successful movie as well. So overall, I think that when I remember George Foreman, I'm gonna remember him as just a great man. He was a great man, super humble guy. He didn't have to be that humble. He wasn't the guy who was rah rah, all cocky and everything like that. A lot of people would like to, before obviously his passing, a lot of people would have liked to remember him like that, but that was never the case, because everybody was always building this great story about Muhammad Ali and his comeback and everything like that. But nobody ever, like, not many people ever really took a chance to look into George Foreman and to see how humble he was, how good of a guy he was. And overall, at that second stint of his career, he based it off of love. I mean, the guy had nothing but love for everybody. The guy was nothing but just a great guy. And what I love the most about all of this is how after Ali's career was all over, after Ali was going through Parkinson's disease and everything like that, Ali and George Foreman, they became very, very good friends, and that's just the most beautiful thing about boxing. One moment you guys are trying to tear each other apart. The next moment, you guys are just you guys are just the best of friends. And honestly, that's very inspiring and motivational for those two to kind of reconcile to have a great relationship before Ali's passing. And even Joe Frazier, he had a very good friendship from what I remember with Joe Frazier before Joe Frazier sadly passed away. But honestly, this is a very, very sad moment for the sport of boxing because George Foreman was like the last of that trio, those heavyweight kings, and now he's passed away. But overall, I don't think we should never forget how big George Foreman not only was to the sport of boxing, but just overall how he carried himself. That man really did carry himself like a true warrior, like a true champion. And I got nothing but love and respect for George Foreman. It honestly breaks my heart, honestly, that I'm reporting about his passing because I didn't think that it would happen. 76 for George Foreman feels really like just too soon. So it really is heartbreaking. But I do want to end this by saying, may George Foreman rest in peace and just condolences to his friends and family for the loss that they've taken today. But overall, that's the way I want to end it. I just want everybody to remember how great George Foreman was as a fighter and as a person. And I just hope that, if anything, if y'all learn about his story, I just hope that y'all can carry yourselves in the same way that George Foreman did. So, with that being said, I'm not going to put any social medias. I'm not going to try to promote myself, nothing like that. I'm just going to say, may he rest in peace, condolences to the family, and it really is a sad loss for the sport of boxing.